My 31st birthday came and went. No calls, no texts, no happy birthday, honey. I'm Lauren Mitchell, 31, a software developer living in Chicago. The quiet one who never needed anything from anyone. At least that's what my parents always said. I'd stopped expecting anything years ago. But this year, the silence felt heavier somehow. Then the next morning, my friend Jennifer sent me a screenshot. It was from my sister Madison's Instagram story. Our parents handing her the keys to a brand new Audi Q7. The caption read, "Early birthday gift from the best parents in the world." Her birthday's in January. This was March 16th, one day after mine. I stared at that photo for 20 straight minutes. Then I blocked them all. They forgot my birthday 5 years in a row. Now they'll remember my silence forever. It started when I turned 27. March 15th, 2018. No call. No text. Not even a lazy Facebook message. 2 days later, Mom finally answered. "Oh, honey, work's been crazy. We'll celebrate soon, promise." She never did. I told myself people forget sometimes. Life gets busy. Maybe I was being dramatic. Then it happened again. 28, 29, 30. Each year, Madison got something bigger. A Nashville trip. A surprise party with 50 people. A designer necklace. And me? A Target gift card that barely covered groceries. I used to think I was fine with it. That I'd outgrown birthdays. That success and independence were better gifts than attention. But every March 15th, I'd still check my phone more than usual. Still wait for that call that never came. I told myself they loved me differently, not less. That maybe this was adulthood, where affection turns into polite distance. But love shouldn't feel like being forgotten. Sometimes I'd replay old birthdays in my mind. The lopsided cakes, the store-bought candles. The way Madison's laughter always filled the room louder than mine. Even as a kid, I learned to shrink, to smile and make it easier for them to love her more. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was realizing they remembered her every single time. They always had the energy for Madison. "She just needs us more," Mom once said. "You're the strong one, Lauren. You don't need fuss." Strong. Their favorite excuse for neglect. And I played along. Because that's what good daughters do. Until the Audi. $60,000 of proof that love could be purchased. That was the night I stopped defending them. Stopped pretending indifference was maturity. That was the night I decided to disappear. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't scream. It just goes silent. The first few days after I blocked them were quiet. No notifications. No guilt. Just silence. I hadn't realized how much noise they took up in my life. Every text, every guilt-ridden phone call, every subtle reminder that I was never quite enough. It all vanished overnight. I started sleeping better. Eating better. Working with focus I hadn't felt in years. My apartment finally felt like mine. Not the waiting room between their next demand and my next apology. For the first time, peace didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Then the calls started. At first, my coworker Beth told me someone had phoned the office asking for me. A woman named Susan Mitchell. Sounded worried, Beth said. Said it was a family emergency. The next day, it was my father. Then my sister. 3 calls before lunch. By Friday, the receptionist stopped picking up numbers from Ohio. They didn't stop there. Mom messaged my college roommate, asking if I was depressed. Dad found one of my colleagues on LinkedIn, asking if my behavior at work had changed. Madison started messaging my friends with a new tone. Sweet, fragile, the helpless little sister. "We're just so worried about Lauren," she wrote. "She's not answering anyone. Please tell her we love her." Love. That word felt foreign coming from them. Screenshots poured in from friends, each one more desperate than the last. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something colder. Confirmation. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about control. They even called my landlord, asking if I still lived there, if I seemed mentally stable. He knocked on my door, confused, mumbling something about my family just being concerned. That was when I realized this wasn't care. This was intrusion. A performance. They wanted witnesses to their pain, not accountability for mine. So I tightened my walls, changed my passwords, moved my mailbox to a private box. Every step away from them felt like a breath of air after years underwater. Madison didn't stop. She began posting about unconditional love, sharing throwbacks of us as kids, writing captions like, "Family isn't the same when someone's missing." She tagged me in every post, as if guilt could drag me home. But it didn't. I watched their panic from a distance, the facade cracking, the golden family image beginning to rot. Their tears weren't grief. They were frustration, because their audience was slipping away. And that's when I understood something new. Peace can look a lot like revenge. When the people who broke you finally have to sit in silence. They wanted me to crawl back. Instead, I learned how to stand tall in silence. Then came the letters. Long looping handwriting from my mother, all lavender ink and guilt. She wrote about missing me, about sleepless nights, about how the house felt too quiet without my voice. But the apologies were never real. They were dressed up in ifs and almosts. I'm sorry if you felt neglected. We never meant for you to feel less important than Madison. Every line avoided accountability like it was contagious. It wasn't regret. It was reputation control on paper. The packages came next. Care boxes filled with my favorite childhood snacks, old paperbacks, and photos from family vacations I barely remembered. Each one came with a note begging me to call. After 5 forgotten birthdays, they suddenly knew exactly what I liked. Then there was Dad's letter. Typed, formal, businesslike. He wrote that communication had broken down, and maybe they'd unintentionally favored Madison. Unintentionally, as if forgetting my existence 5 years straight was a scheduling error, not a choice. He even suggested family counseling, a tidy solution to sweep decades of favoritism under a therapist's rug. But what really got me was Madison's online performance. Her posts started shifting from cheerful to theatrical. A photo of her and my parents. Captioned, "Family isn't the same when someone's missing. Love you always, sis." Another with our childhood picture. Sending love to everyone who's hurting today. Hashtags. #family, #unconditional love, #miss you. She tagged me, of course. And when she realized I'd blocked her, she started tagging my friends instead. Each caption was a masterclass in selective memory. She talked about how close we'd been. How she'd always looked up to me. Revisionist history in real time. I hadn't been her best friend. I'd been her background noise. The final act came with the event invite. Amanda's 32nd birthday celebration. Wherever you are, we love you. They were throwing a birthday party. For the daughter they'd forgotten 5 years in a row. The invitation was public, sentimental, and tagged half my Chicago circle. It wasn't about love. It was about control. They wanted to rewrite the narrative, turn neglect into tragedy, turn my silence into cruelty. But here's the thing about stories. Once you stop letting someone else write yours, they panic. And in their panic, they show who they really are. They forgot me 5 birthdays in a row. But now they'll never forget what silence feels like. It took them almost a year to finally show up at my door. I knew they would eventually. People like my parents always do. When guilt becomes inconvenient. It was a Saturday morning. I was watering the plants by my window when the knock came. 3 quick hits, then Mom's voice. "Lauren, sweetheart, please, we just want to talk." I didn't open right away. Instead, I took a deep breath, like my therapist taught me. Control the room before you enter it. When I finally unlatched the door, the 3 of them stood there. Mom in pearls and sunglasses. Dad with his jaw tight. Madison holding a tissue like a prop. "Can we come in?" Mom asked softly. I stepped aside. They took in my clean, quiet apartment. A space without their chaos. Dad went first. "You've made your point," he said. "We're sorry things got out of hand." Got out of hand. That's what he called 5 forgotten birthdays. And a lifetime of favoritism. Mom sat on the edge of my couch, hands trembling just enough to seem sincere. "We didn't know how much it hurt you," she whispered. "We just want our family back." Madison's voice cracked. "I can't sleep, Lauren. You've cut us off completely. I don't even know why you hate me." I looked at her, my golden sister who never noticed my pain. "I don't hate you," I said calmly. "I just stopped participating in my own neglect." The silence was sharp. Dad's face reddened. "Enough drama. You're being cruel." I almost laughed. Cruel? Cruel was 5 years of invisibility, followed by a $60,000 reminder that I didn't matter. "You taught me something important," I said. "When you stop chasing love, you start finding peace." Mom reached out. "Please, honey, can't we start over?" I stepped back. "No, Mom, we can't start over. You'd have to admit what you did first." Their eyes darted around the room, searching for the old Lauren, the one who apologized to make things easier. She wasn't here anymore. "I wish you well," I said quietly. "Truly, but you can leave now." Mom started to cry. Dad muttered something about regret. Madison whispered my name. I opened the door, gestured toward the hallway, and waited. They left in silence. For the first time, it was on my terms. When the door clicked shut, I stood there for a while, listening to the echo fade. The quiet wasn't heavy this time. It was freedom. Their voices used to fill every corner of my life. Now peace did. I sat on the couch they'd just occupied and smiled to myself. I hadn't won. I'd simply stopped losing. They came to rewrite the story again, but I already finished the ending. A week after the confrontation, my apartment still smelled like their perfume, but the air felt cleaner, lighter. I used to think closure came from forgiveness. Now I know, sometimes closure is just choosing silence and meaning it. The days after they left were strangely peaceful. I worked, cooked real meals again, started sleeping through the night. No frantic phone calls, no guilt texts, no invisible weight pressing on my chest. My therapist asked, "How does it feel to finally stop fixing people?" I said, like I finally started living for me. That weekend, I took a solo trip to Michigan. Nothing fancy, just a cabin, a lake, and quiet. I left my phone in airplane mode and watched the sunrise alone. For once, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I thought about all those birthdays they forgot and realized something beautiful. I never needed their celebration to be worth remembering. Forgiveness isn't always reunion. Sometimes it's just releasing the version of yourself who begged to be seen. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for apologies that may never come. I'm busy living a life that doesn't require permission or validation. And in that, there's peace. When people ask if I'll ever talk to them again, I tell them maybe, but only if they can recognize the daughter they taught to disappear. Until then, I'll keep doing what they never did, remembering myself. Because love without respect isn't love, it's habit. And I'm done being someone's habit. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to save your sanity? Tell me in the comments, I'll be reading. If you've been through this, you're not alone.
Ryan didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He just set down his wine glass, folded his napkin like we were finishing brunch, and said it. "You've got 7 days to move out." I didn't speak. Neither did my parents. George, my father, stayed focused on the gravy boat like it held some secret to escape. Margaret, my mother, twisted her cloth napkin until it looked like rope. No one looked at me. It was a quiet Sunday evening in the dining room we all pretended hadn't changed. The candlelight flickered against the wood-paneled walls, casting soft shadows over the china cabinet. My chicken was still warm. The lemon tart I'd baked sat untouched in the center of the table. The air smelled like rosemary and powdered sugar. And my brother Ryan Whitaker, 36 fresh from a Denver divorce, was grinning like he'd just been promoted. I took a breath, reached down beside me past my chair, and lifted the old VHS case I'd slid into my tote that morning. Black plastic scuffed at the corners, a leftover from our childhood movie nights. I clicked it open slow and steady like I was about to play the feature presentation. Instead, I pulled out a cream-colored folder. Thick, worn, edged with tabs. I didn't raise my voice either. Actually, I said, placing the folder beside my plate, "This house isn't yours to give." Ryan blinked. My mother's fork slipped clinking against her plate. My father finally looked up, brows knotted like he'd just realized he was late for something. I didn't move. Funny thing about ownership. Sometimes it has nothing to do with names on paper and everything to do with who people choose to believe. It started slow, like most things that fall apart. 3 years ago, the house was slipping, though no one said the word foreclosure out loud. Dad George had funneled most of his retirement into some oil startup a coworker swore would explode any day now. It exploded all right, into dust. Mom Margaret had been in and out of the hospital after her second heart episode. The bills stacked faster than she could open them. I found them one morning tucked under the microwave envelopes marked Urgent One with a red stamp across the front that said, "Final Notice." She never mentioned them. The mailbox groaned with late fees and lien threats. The wallpaper in the hallway had started peeling. The bathroom ceiling dripped when it rained. And yet we all kept pretending the floor wasn't shifting beneath us. Ryan was somewhere in Colorado then, living in a Mountain View condo, or maybe Bali, I don't remember. He posted photos of smoothies and sunrises of his fiancée's sapphire ring and his dog's birthday party. He didn't ask about home. He didn't ask about Mom's hospital stays, or Dad's silence, or the final notice pinned to the fridge like a grocery list. I didn't tell him either. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I refinanced the house under my name. I took out a business loan against my freelance design income, the same income no one ever really understood but always thanked when the lights stayed on. I worked 60-hour weeks from the guest room, sleeping next to spreadsheets and legal pads, ate boxed macaroni and gas station soup, and kept the heat at 62 all winter. The foreclosure letters stopped coming. That was the only sign that anything had changed. No one asked me how. They were just relieved the panic had passed. Dad said, "Well, thank God for miracles." Mom smiled and started planting her garden again, even though she never planted it, and I let them believe it had been luck or grace or timing, because I wasn't doing it for credit. I wasn't saving the house for applause. I was doing it for what the house had been. The creaky third step on the staircase that always gave me away during late-night fridge raids. The scorch mark on the deck from the time Ryan lit fireworks too close to the grill. The floral wallpaper Mom had picked in 1998, peeling now but still holding the scent of lemon cleaner and old Sunday afternoons. Some people say a house is just walls and wires, but this one was stitched with memory, with the quiet kind of love no one noticed until it was gone. He showed up on a Wednesday. No warning, no call. Just the sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway, followed by the familiar screech of the screen door opening like it still belonged to him. I was in the kitchen drying dishes when I heard Mom gasp. "Pumpkin," she whispered. Her whole face lit up like she'd just stepped into a memory. Ryan stood in the entryway with 2 pieces of monogrammed luggage and a too-white smile. He was dressed in something expensive-looking and rumpled like he'd tried and failed to look effortless. The smell of citrus cologne followed him in like fog. He walked over to Mom, kissed her cheek with dramatic slowness, then turned to Dad and clapped his shoulder. "Still got that recliner, huh? Pops?" Dad chuckled and nodded, eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stayed in the kitchen doorway, dish towel still damp in my hands. He didn't look at me. Not a nod, not a flicker. Just like that, he was home again, and I was already fading from the picture. Later that night, I overheard the pieces. The startup he'd built in Denver collapsed after a series of lawsuits. His marriage had ended after something to do with property disputes, whose name was on what, who paid for which. The ring, the condo, the dog, they were all gone. He needed time to regroup, and he figured the family home would be a good place to reset. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how easily he made it sound like the house had just been there waiting for him, as if it hadn't nearly vanished, as if someone else hadn't fought to keep the roof from collapsing. He moved into the master bedroom like it had been reserved for him. His luggage landed hard on the hardwood floor. Margaret fluffed the pillows. George offered to bring up an extra blanket. No one asked me where I'd sleep. I returned to the guest room, the same one I'd turned into an office after paying off the mortgage. No one thanked me, but they had enough energy to fawn over Ryan's newest photos from a yoga retreat in Arizona and a half joke about starting a real estate podcast. I thought of something Dad once said when I graduated college. "You're steady, Lisa. That's good. Just don't expect applause." He was right. I never expected it. But I didn't expect to be forgotten either. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about erosion. It's slow, almost gentle, until one day you realize the ground beneath you is gone. The first signs were small. Ryan moved my spices. Just rearranged them one afternoon without asking. When I mentioned it, he laughed. "You're so type A, Liz. Let a little chaos in." Then, Mom stopped making decaf in the mornings. She brewed Ryan's dark roast instead. When I asked about it, she just said, "Oh, I didn't think you needed it today." The rhythm shifted. They started talking over me at dinner. Conversations paused when I entered the room. The air changed, the weight of their glances not cruel, but excluding settled heavy across my shoulders. One evening, I opened the fridge and found my labeled leftovers missing. I asked Dad if he'd seen them. He didn't answer. Ryan smirked and said I thought it was up for grabs. I didn't argue. I just started writing my name in bigger letters. A week in Ryan suggested converting the den into a media room. The den had been mine. My office. My desk, my files, my calendar taped to the wall. He said he'd bring in a projector, maybe some beanbags. Dad nodded. That could be fun. I moved my desk back into the guest room. Margaret told me I was being tense. George said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," But I wasn't the one making anything. I was just trying to keep still while the floor shifted. Then came the whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. I was standing inside the screen door lights off. They were on the back porch, Mom, Dad, and Ryan, drinking wine and looking up at the sky like the future might fall from it. "She's always been so rigid," Ryan said. "She's tired," Mom replied. Then softer. "She holds on to things. Maybe it's time she found her own place." Dad didn't respond, but he didn't protest either. They didn't know I was there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there feeling something settle in my chest, like cold ash. That was the moment I understood this wasn't temporary. Ryan hadn't come back to heal. He came to reclaim, and they were ready to let him. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next morning. I didn't slam any doors. Didn't ask questions. I just pulled the old file folder from the bottom drawer of my nightstand, the one with the fraying corners and a single post-it stuck to the front keep. Always. Inside was everything. The deed signed and notarized, the refinance documents, the mortgage payoff receipt dated 18 months ago, property tax records, insurance confirmations, every envelope I'd opened, every late notice I'd silenced, all filed, labeled, and time-stamped. I laid the papers out across the bed like blueprints of something I'd built with my own hands. I ran my fingers along the edge of the deed, tracing the loop in my own signature. I hadn't looked at it in months, not because I'd forgotten it was mine, but because part of me still needed to believe I didn't have to prove it. Turns out I did. I added a copy of the letter from my attorney, Mr. Hernandez, the one who'd walked me through every clause like I was his daughter, not just a client. His name was printed at the top in serif font, followed by the line sole legal owner Lisa Ann Whitaker. No bold, no italics, just fact. I sat down at my desk and looked at the folder again. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't even feel like anger. It felt like recognition, like the quiet, steady knowing of a person who'd been gaslit into thinking they were temporary in their own story. I closed the folder, slipped it into my tote bag, and set it by the door. It was roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes. That lemon vinaigrette salad Mom always made when she wanted things to feel normal. The table was set for 4. Ryan brought the wine, a deep red, in an overpriced bottle he'd picked up on the way home from yoga because of course he did. Dad carved the chicken with the same knife he'd used every Thanksgiving since 1992. Mom folded the napkins into the same little fans she used to make when we had company. But there wasn't anyone else coming. Just us. Just the 4 of us pretending. I didn't say much. I passed the bread. I refilled the water glasses. I watched them how they leaned toward Ryan when he talked, how they laughed too hard when he made some half-formed joke about cryptocurrency, how no one asked me about my day. Halfway through the meal, Ryan set down his wine glass with that theatrical little flourish he always used when he was about to perform. Then he smiled at me, like a cat that had already swallowed the bird. "You've got 7 days to move out." He said it like it was weather, like he was just reading it off the forecast. I blinked. Mom looked down at her plate. Dad reached for the salt. No one said a word. "Excuse me," I said quietly. Ryan tilted his head. His tone was syrup. "It's not personal, Liz. We just think it's time you moved on. You've been here a long time." "It's not healthy." I repeated. He nodded toward our parents like a lawyer presenting co-signers. "Mom and Dad agree," he said smoothly. Dad cleared his throat. "It's not about the house," he mumbled. "It's about peace. Harmony." "Peace," I echoed. "You think this is peace?" Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the table like we were gossiping over coffee. "Your energy," he said, "it's heavy." I almost laughed. This coming from the man who hadn't paid a single bill, who walked back in and acted like a king returning from exile. I set my fork down. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From clarity. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table. Opened it to the deed. "This house isn't yours to give." Ryan stared at it like it was written in another language. Mom's eyes flicked from the page to my face, then back again. Dad's knife paused mid-cut. "I don't understand," Ryan said, his voice suddenly brittle. "It's real. I replied. Signed, notarized, legally binding. I refinanced under my name, paid off the liens, covered the insurance, paid the taxes, repaired the roof, fixed the mold in the basement. I slid another page across the table. This is from my attorney. If you want to call him, go ahead. He's on speaker. I dialed. 1 ring, 2. Then the voice of Mr. Hernandez came through the phone, steady and crisp. Yes, the property is solely owned by Ms. Lisa Ann Whitaker. As of April 4th, 18 months ago. Silence. Ryan stood. His chair screeched against the floor. So this is about control. No, I said. It's about respect, Mom whispered. You're kicking out your family. I'm reclaiming what I built. I pulled out one last document, a printed letter with a blue stamp. This is a formal eviction notice. You have 24 hours. After that, law enforcement gets involved. The locksmith comes tomorrow. Ryan's face twisted. You wouldn't dare. You dared first, I said. I didn't sleep that night. The house creaked the way old homes do when they're holding their breath. I heard drawers opening, the thud of boxes, the click of doors shutting just softly enough to pretend nothing was final. Their voices were muffled but not hushed, not secretive, just resigned. At 8:13 a.m., I heard Ryan's voice slice through the quiet like broken glass. Just bring the truck around. I don't need help. I just need you to be fast. I didn't move. I didn't open my door. I didn't stand in the hallway to watch. I just sat at the edge of my bed with my hands in my lap, waiting for it to be over. Footsteps on the stairs, a bag dragging across the hardwood, then nothing. At 10:07, I finally stepped into the hallway. Empty. But the air felt charged, like the silence after lightning, just as loud as the strike itself. I passed the living room. Dad George was sitting in his old recliner facing the blank television screen, remote in hand, thumb resting on the power button. He didn't look up, didn't say my name, just let me pass like I was a guest in my own hallway. In the kitchen, Mom Margaret was wrapping plates in newspaper, the fragile box already half full. She paused when she saw me. Your father doesn't know where we'll go yet, she said softly, eyes still on the plate in her hands. Emma offered her apartment for a while. It'll be cramped. I didn't answer. I just nodded once and reached for the kettle. She didn't mean to, Mom began. She did, I interrupted. And you let her. Her shoulders fell. She didn't argue. She just picked up the next plate and kept wrapping. By 11:40 a.m., the front door opened and closed 3 times. Once for Ryan, once for Mom, once for Dad. No goodbyes, no slammed doors. Just the sound of departure, the hollow rush of wind pushing against the windows. At 12:03, I walked to the front door, locked it, turned the deadbolt slowly, felt it click into place. It was done. No yelling, no broken things, just a fracture deep, precise, clean. The kind that doesn't bleed on the outside, but never really heals. I walked through the house room by room. Nothing was left behind, but their presence still lingered. The faint scent of Dad's aftershave. Mom's gardening gloves forgotten on the windowsill. The perfume Ryan sprayed like ownership in the guest room. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. In the foyer, I found Dad's old station wagon key, the one he never used anymore, the one that still hung on the hook beside the door out of habit. I took it down, held it in my palm for a moment. Then I hung it again. Not for memory, not for mourning. Just to say this too is mine now. The first morning without them was quiet in a new way. Not the silence I'd grown used to, the kind filled with tension, with footsteps behind doors and whispered judgment. This was something else, clean, still, like the house had exhaled. I made coffee, sat by the window. For once, no one had claimed the best seat. The light poured through the glass, warming the wood floors Ryan used to track dirt across. I let it stretch across my toes and didn't move. By noon, I started with the master bedroom, the one he'd taken like it was owed to him. I opened every window, let the air move, peeled back the thick curtains Margaret had insisted on keeping for tradition's sake. repainted the walls a soft neutral gray, not to erase what had been, but to give the room a voice that didn't echo someone else's. I hung a single photo above the bed, me arms outstretched on a mountain trail in Montana. No one else in the frame, just sky and quiet. Next was the hallway. I took down the old family portraits, not to destroy them, but to stop them from looming. I wrapped each one in brown paper and slid them into a box marked Memories Not Altars. I placed the box in the attic. In the garden, I pulled out Mom's roses. They'd been dying for years. She never watered them, but insisted we keep them because they were Dad's favorite. Instead, I planted lavender and rosemary plants that don't beg for attention but bloom if given enough space and sun. Each act was a decision, not of grief, but of ownership. I fixed the creaky stair Ryan always complained about, replaced the light bulb in the attic, donated the old recliner, the one Dad used to sink into like silence. The guest room, my room again, became a real office. I set up a new desk, a lamp, left the windows uncovered so the afternoon light could spill in. I cooked dinner for one, ate at the kitchen table without music, without conversation. And then slowly I began to allow other sounds in. Music from my old CD player, the soft scrape of my chair against the floor, laughter my own when I spilled tea on the rug and didn't have to apologize. The house began to respond, not with noise, but with breath. It stopped feeling haunted, stopped echoing with almosts. It started to feel like mine, not in paperwork, but in presence. It came on a Tuesday, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer, a plain white envelope with no return address. But I recognized the handwriting, instantly looped and careful, each letter curved like it had been practiced on birthday cards and school permission slips. Margaret's handwriting. I stood by the mailbox for a long time, just holding it. The paper was warm from the sun. I thought briefly about tossing it unopened, not out of anger, just disinterest, like returning to a book I'd already finished. Still, I opened it. 2 pages, neat, no corrections, no apology. She said she forgave me for what she didn't say, only that she hoped I'd come to my senses one day, that Ryan had been trying his best, that they were managing in the apartment Emma let them use even if it was small and not ideal. She ended with, "We still love you, Lisa, even if we don't understand you anymore." I read it once, then again. Then I folded it precisely and dropped it into the bin beside the recycling, not as a gesture, not to be dramatic, just because I didn't need it. I didn't need forgiveness for defending my home. I didn't need love wrapped in conditions or sentences that ended in even if. For so long, I had begged for crumbs, validation, kindness, the smallest sign that they saw me. But now I was full. The silence that followed their absence wasn't empty anymore. It was clear. I didn't write back. I didn't bring up the letter, didn't reread it. I let it sit where I'd dropped it beneath a stack of unread coupons and junk mail. Some stories don't need answers. I poured tea, sat by the window, and let the afternoon light stretch across the new lavender plants. They were blooming now, small, deliberate, steady. The house no longer echoed. It held, not gently, not perfectly, but honestly. There were still things left undone. A chipped tile in the kitchen, a creak in the floor by the hallway closet, the smell of lemon cleaner clinging faintly to the baseboards. I didn't fix all of it. Some of it I kept, as proof that things don't have to be flawless to be real. I stopped waiting to be seen, stopped shrinking myself to fit into a version of the past that never made room for me. I didn't close the door out of anger. I closed it because it had been open too long, and because I finally could. 12 years passed without a single visit call or birthday card. Then, one afternoon in March, a cream-colored envelope arrived, no return address, just my name in thick, deliberate handwriting. Susan Blake. Inside was an invitation. A weekend family retreat hosted by my siblings at the old house in Glen Arbor. The paper was stiff, almost ceremonial. Cheryl, of course, had signed it in blue fountain pen ink. Rob must have handled the logistics. He always did. I set it down beside my tea and stared out the window for a while. The trees hadn't bloomed yet. The branches still looked like fingers caught in prayer, reaching but not touching anything. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. They'd already counted on me being quiet. On the day I arrived, the driveway was already full. Rob's Tesla, Cheryl's Lexus, a rental SUV. The same wind chimes my mother hung 20 years ago still clinked above the porch, though one of the metal tubes had snapped. The sound was off balance, too sharp, too short. I paused at the door, my bag still slung over one shoulder. Cheryl answered. Still tall, still trim her blazer, a shade too elegant for a family weekend. She smiled wide, leaned in, and hugged me without really touching. "You came," she said loudly, enunciating each syllable. "We weren't sure you'd get the letter." I nodded and held up the notepad in my hand, the one they assumed I used to communicate ever since I lost my hearing in 2012. She patted my arm too quickly. "Good," she said. "It'll be good." Inside, nothing had changed. The same floral couch, the same clock above the mantel stuck at 11:38, probably for years now, but someone had scrubbed the place clean. There were fresh flowers on the piano I used to play. Lavender-scented candles flickered along the hallway. I found my mother Doris in the kitchen arranging silverware. Her hands moved slower than I remembered. Her hair had turned almost fully white. When she looked up, her smile faltered for just a breath before settling into a familiar flatness. "Susan," she said, "you look the same." I wrote, "It's good to see you." She nodded without meeting my eyes. Dinner that night was polite, like a first meeting between people who used to live in the same skin. Frank, my father, didn't say much. He rarely had, unless it was about Cheryl's promotions or Rob's real estate ventures. He coughed twice during the soup course, then asked if I needed a softer chair. I shook my head. "Still managing on your own out there?" Rob asked, refilling his wine glass. His wife Karen said nothing. She never did, but her eyes swept over me like I was a spreadsheet. "She's always been independent." Cheryl chimed in, slicing her chicken with precise, practiced movements. "Lived all the way out in Oregon, didn't even come when Dad had his first heart episode." The silence that followed wasn't mine. It belonged to the room. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I unpacked slowly. I placed my phone by the lamp, turned off notifications, and slipped my hearing aids into their case. They were fully functional now. No one knew. The notepad rested on the nightstand blank. They hadn't asked why I came. The next morning began with Cheryl's voice floating through the hallway, bright and managerial. "Breakfast in the sunroom at 9. Rob, you'll explain the estate plan over coffee." She spoke as if she were hosting a seminar, not corralling the remains of a family. I took my time getting downstairs. By the time I arrived, Cheryl was already seated at the head of the table napkin, folded like origami on her lap. Daniel, her second husband, polished, smug, stood behind her chair, tapping at his smartwatch. Rob looked up from a thick manila folder, gave me a tight-lipped smile, and gestured toward a seat at the far end. "We saved you the one by the window. Quieter there." There were 7 chairs. Mine didn't match. No cushion, no armrest. A little too low. I sat without comment. Karen passed me a plate with a single piece of dry toast. "We weren't sure what you can eat these days," she said. I smiled, faintly declined the butter, and took my time. Cheryl began the morning's agenda with the Vermont cabin. "It needs updating, obviously," she said, flipping to a color-coded page. "We're thinking of merging it into the main trust. If we all sign off, it'll be easier when the time comes." The time. Meaning their passing. Or so they framed it. Frank cleared his throat. "The cabin was your Uncle Bill's. He left it to the 3 of you." I wrote slowly on my notepad. "The deed says equally." Cheryl glanced at it, then at Rob. "Of course. But you've been away, and upkeep falls on those who are here." Daniel chuckled. "It's not about fairness, it's about practicality." I watched them talk around me, over me, through me. I listened without looking engaged. My eyes drifted to the mantel, where an old family photo still sat, 4th of July, maybe 1985. Cheryl in red ribbons. Rob already in slacks and a collared shirt. I was in the middle, holding a sparkler that had already gone out. After breakfast, Rob took Dad into the den for a quick update. Cheryl and Karen discussed floral arrangements for Doris's birthday dinner. I lingered in the kitchen rinsing my own plate. Doris sat nearby, rubbing lotion into her hands. "You've kept the place just as it was," I said aloud, my voice quiet, controlled. She looked up sharply. "I didn't know you were speaking again." I let the silence hang. "I wasn't sure what version of you we'd be seeing this weekend," she added. "I'm still me," I said. She sighed. "Cheryl's done a lot to hold the family together. She was the one who visited when we needed things. Rob manages all the paperwork. You chose distance." I dried my hands and folded the towel neatly. I wasn't far. No one ever asked me to come closer. She blinked as if that hadn't occurred to her. That afternoon, Rob passed out packets labeled Asset Reallocation. My name was misspelled on the cover. "Just preliminary ideas," he said. "Of course everything's up for discussion." Inside, I found a chart listing every family asset: the house, the lake property, the Vermont cabin, the workshop, even my mother's jewelry. Cheryl's name was everywhere. Rob's, too. Mine was handwritten in pencil next to miscellaneous heirlooms. Frank hadn't looked up once. Back in my room, I stared at the papers for a long time. Then I reached for the recorder app on my phone and whispered, "They've rewritten the family. I'm just a guest in the draft." That night, I went downstairs for tea and found Rob in the study. The door was open just enough to catch his voice. He was on the phone, pacing slowly, unaware I stood just outside. She's cooperative enough. If we frame it as a Medicaid prep, she'll sign without knowing what it is. Honestly, she's lucky we're keeping her on the Vermont deed at all. Cheryl thinks we should move fast before the hearing thing wears off if it hasn't already. There was a pause, then a low laugh. "I know, but she's not sharp anymore. Half the time she doesn't even follow what's being said." I stepped back without making a sound. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the voice recorder app. I tapped once, then again to make sure. I held the phone flat against my chest until he hung up. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I drove into town under the excuse of needing allergy medication. Instead, I found a small brick office with faded blinds. Howard Green Estate Law. He'd been my Uncle Bill's attorney once, and the last adult to treat me like I was part of the family on purpose. He opened the door himself, cane in one hand, expression puzzled until he saw my face. "Susan Blake," he said. "God, it's been, 25 years?" "Almost 30, I said. "And I need your help." I handed him the packet Rob had given me. He skimmed through it in silence. I showed him the voice memo. I waited while he played it again. Then he set the phone down carefully and nodded. "I'll need to make a few calls." By the end of the week, Howard had found enough to confirm what I feared: amendments made to the Blake Trust 3 months earlier. My signature on forms I never signed. An email thread between Rob and a third-party broker listing me as financially non-viable. "I can push this uphill," Howard said, "but you need to be ready. They'll say you misunderstood, that it's your condition, that you're confused." "I'm not," I said. "I've never been more clear." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly, not sadly, but with something that felt like recognition. That night, I returned to the house and sat at the piano, the same one I hadn't touched since I was 17. The keys were colder than I remembered, out of tune. A few stuck, but the sound still came. Behind me in the dining room, I heard Cheryl laugh. Rob poured wine. Doris called out to Frank to light the fire. No one noticed the melody I played, an old folk song Uncle Bill taught me one winter in Vermont. When I finished, I closed the lid and walked upstairs. On my nightstand, I placed the documents from Howard, the memo file, and the recorder. Then, I picked up the notepad and wrote one sentence just for myself. They didn't just forget me, they planned it that way. The next day passed like steam from a teacup, quiet, slow dissolving before anyone could name it. I spent the morning outside, pruning a corner of the garden that had grown wild since I last saw it. My mother Doris sat on a bench nearby, bundled in a shawl she didn't need. The sun was mild. The ground smelled of old mulch and new grass. "You always liked digging around out here," she said. "Never did mind dirt under your nails." I didn't answer. She watched me for a moment. "You've changed." "Have I?" I kept my gaze on the root I was teasing free. She folded her hands in her lap. "You used to ask to come home more often. After college. After you moved out west. But when you didn't hear back, you stopped trying. Cheryl always said it was best to let you be. I paused, then met her eyes. I called when Dad had his first stroke, I said. I left messages. You never called back. She looked away. You had your own life. We assumed you needed space. Space I never asked for. The breeze picked up. A few petals from the dogwood tree blew across Doris's shoes. She didn't move. I'm sorry if we didn't make things clear, she said softly. You were always more sensitive. Your letters were emotional. We didn't know how to respond. I wasn't asking for poetry, I said, just presence. A robin landed on the garden fence, then flew away. We sat without speaking for a while. Then she stood slowly and returned to the house, leaving me with the dirt and the silence I'd learned to survive in. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and turned on the recorder again. They never heard me, but I heard everything. The doors they shut, the words they didn't say. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows folded into one another. Somewhere downstairs, a chair scraped. The heater clicked on. I thought of the first time I lost hearing in my left ear. I was 28. I'd just mailed a handmade quilt to Cheryl's newborn son. No one ever said thank you. No one even told me it arrived. I thought of the piano, how I used to play with my whole body, pressing my weight into the chords, believing the house was listening. The night I stopped playing, it was raining. I came home from school to find Rob boxing up Dad's records, Cheryl handing out task lists, and Doris telling me the freezer was broken. No one asked how my day was. No one looked up. I remembered walking upstairs that night and packing a single bag. They didn't push me out. They just let me disappear. And I did. Until now. Cheryl insisted we dress up for Doris's birthday dinner. Just a little sparkle, she said, placing a brooch shaped like a leaf on our mother's collar. You only turned 75 once. The table was set with care, real china-polished silver linen napkins folded into fans. Frank wore a blazer 2 sizes too loose. Rob opened a bottle of wine with a practiced flick, and Karen arranged the seating without asking. My name card was at the end again. No one offered a toast. Instead, Cheryl cleared her throat and smiled. We've all come so far, haven't we? She began glancing around. Mom, you've raised 3 incredibly resilient children. Rob's business is thriving. I just signed on as VP for development. And Susan, well, she's back with us now, and that's what matters. I smiled faintly and reached for my notepad. But this time I didn't write. I spoke. Actually, I said I'd like to say something. Forks stilled. Rob blinked. Doris sat straighter but didn't speak. I've been listening to all of you, I said calmly. More than you realize. I took out my phone and placed it gently next to the bread basket. One tap and the recording began. Rob's voice filled the space. She's cooperative enough. If we frame it as a Medicaid prep, she'll sign without knowing what it is. A pause. Then the low laugh. She's not sharp anymore. Half the time she doesn't even follow what's being said. The room changed. Karen's eyes widened. Cheryl's hand gripped the edge of her chair. Rob opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I stopped the recording. Doris didn't move. Her fork was suspended midair. I spoke to Uncle Bill's lawyer, I said. Howard Green. He confirmed my signature was forged on the trust amendment. You moved my name. You reassigned what didn't belong to you. Cheryl found her voice first. Susan, this isn't the place. We're celebrating Mom. Why would you bring this up now? I turned to Doris. Did you know she didn't answer? Did you know what they were doing? Or did you just let them do it like always? I didn't sign anything, she whispered. But you looked away. You always do. Rob tried again. We thought you didn't care about that property. You've been gone so long it made sense. Since my voice stayed even. To remove a family member by paperwork. He exhaled sharply. Don't be dramatic. That word. Always that word. I stood slowly. This isn't about money. You took something else. You rewrote where I belong. And I want it back. Cheryl's voice rose. You think this earns you some kind of reward? You vanish for a decade, then show up with a tape recorder and accusations. No, I said. I don't want a reward. I want the record corrected." Doris finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy. "You were always too soft," she said quietly. "Too careful with people. You never knew how to play the game." I nodded. "Maybe. But I've learned how to document it." I picked up the phone, slipped it into my pocket, and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard Frank murmur, "Let her go." And no one stopped me. I stayed one more night. Not out of obligation, but to sleep beneath that roof, knowing they couldn't erase me quietly this time. By morning, Cheryl and Rob were already gone. Karen hadn't said goodbye. The dining room was cleared of birthday decorations. The silence was back, but it didn't feel the same. This time, it was mine. I found Doris in the kitchen stirring oatmeal. She didn't look up when I entered. "I'm leaving," I said. She nodded. I figured. I walked to the counter and placed a sealed envelope beside the fruit bowl. "It's from Howard," I said. "The amended trust documents, originals, with corrections." She stirred once more, then stopped. "Your brother won't like this." "I'm not doing it for him." A pause. Then, "You always wanted everything to be fair." "No," I said. "I just wanted to be seen." She looked at me, and for a moment her face softened. Not regret, not warmth, just the outline of something that could have been. "I never knew what to do with you," she admitted. "You felt outside of us, even when you were small." I nodded. "I know." She didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like it had in every season of my childhood. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked to the car. I started the engine, rolled down the window, and looked back at the porch, empty now, except for the wind chime with its broken tube. It made no sound. 6 weeks later, I returned. Not to visit, not for another negotiation. I came to unlock a door I now legally owned. The Vermont cabin stood where it always had pine needles thick on the roof, the path still uneven with stone. No one had touched it. The shutters creaked when I opened them like old lungs remembering how to breathe. Inside, the air smelled like dust and cedar and something warmer memory without pain. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer beside the sink. The tin measuring spoons were still there. Uncle Bill had etched my initials on the smallest one. SB not crossed out, not reassigned. I built a fire, brewed tea, sat by the window while snow began to fall. There were no voices now, no plans, no files, no signatures, just the sound of the place remembering me. And for the first time in years, I didn't need to be heard. If you've ever sat at a table where no one saw you, if you've ever been written out of a story you were born into, then you already know how this ends. Not with revenge, not with raised voices. Just one person standing quietly and walking away from the version they were never allowed to become. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to name names. But if you've ever been uninvited from your own life, just leave one word below the one they never let you say out loud. I'll read every single one, even the silent ones.